We always thought we owned the sea. The cold, unforgiving waters around the Korean peninsula had forged us into something unbreakable. Or so we believed, until we trained alongside the Americans. This isn't some polished after-action report or a press release about alliance strength. This is a confession from a guy who spent years in the Republic of Korea Navy's Special Warfare Flotilla, the unit most people just call ROK UDT/SEALs. I've been through the grinder, the 10-week hell of basic training that weeds out everyone who can't hack it, followed by diving, demolitions, land warfare, and tactics that push you to the edge. We've trained in the roughest seas imaginable, with currents that can rip you apart and winters that freeze your bones before you even hit the water. Our doctrine was built on stealth, precision, and endurance, small teams slipping in like ghosts, leaving no trace. Before those joint exercises, I carried that confidence like body armor. We'd handled coastal defense drills, small-scale infiltrations, and everything the peninsula's complex environment could throw at us. The North's threats were always there, lurking, so our focus was razor-sharp. Silent approaches, minimal footprints, iron discipline. We prided ourselves on it. Our training was legendary, grueling, unforgiving, designed to create operators who could endure anything alone or in tiny elements. Then came the invitation to train with U.S. Navy SEALs and their Marine counterparts in a major amphibious exercise, something like Songyang or one of the bilateral exchanges, big combined operations focused on beach assaults and insertions. I felt a mix of emotions heading into it. Curiosity, sure, who wouldn't want to see how the world's most famous special operators worked up close, but also skepticism. We'd heard the stories. Americans with overwhelming firepower, massive support, high-tech gear. Great at big wars, maybe, but refined? Subtle? In our waters, with our threats, we figured our way was superior. Smaller scale, quieter, more disciplined. And yeah, there was pressure. Heavy pressure. As an ROK operator, you don't want to look second-rate next to your ally. The alliance is everything. It's what keeps the balance on this peninsula. So there was this quiet determination, prove we're equals or better. No room for embarrassment. But deep down, there was a question I couldn't shake, one that haunted me before we even hit the beach. What happens when a way of operating you've trusted with your life for years gets challenged right in front of you, on the very sand you're trying to infiltrate? That's the story I'm confessing here, not the tactics or the classified details. No. This is about the mindset shift, the humility, the growth. How those exercises didn't just teach us new techniques, they forced us to question everything we thought we knew about getting onto a hostile shore. We thought we understood the ocean. Turns out, the ocean and our allies had a few lessons left to teach us. For years, we believed our way was the only way that made sense for us. The Republic of Korea Naval Special Warfare Flotilla had built its reputation on one core principle: invisibility. When it came to infiltrating a hostile shoreline, everything revolved around silence, minimal footprint, and small teams, usually 4 to 8 guys, sometimes even fewer. We trained endlessly for it, night swims in freezing water with full kit, approaching the beach underwater using rebreathers so no bubbles broke the surface, crawling out of the surf like shadows, burying our fins and gear under the sand, then disappearing inland before anyone knew we were there. No noise, no lights, no trace. The goal was simple: get in, complete the mission, recon, sabotage, direct action, and get out without ever being detected. Detection meant failure. Failure meant compromising the entire operation, and on the Korean peninsula, failure could mean a lot more than a bad grade in training. Our doctrine emphasized individual discipline above almost everything else. You had to be able to endure cold, fatigue, fear, and pain on your own. Teamwork mattered, of course, but it was built on the assumption that every operator was a self-contained unit. Speed and silence were king. We drilled the same insertion routes over and over until muscle memory took over. Pick the perfect tide, the perfect current, the perfect moon phase. Plan it down to the minute. Executed exactly as planned. We were proud of that. Damn proud. The waters around Korea aren't forgiving. Strong tidal swings, rocky coasts, unpredictable fog, brutal winters. We'd mastered them through sheer grit. American forces might have all the helicopters, drones, and fire support in the world, but we told ourselves their style was too loud, too dependent on overwhelming force. They were great at storming beaches with Marines and air cover. We were the surgeons, precise, quiet, invisible. There was a quiet arrogance in that pride, if I'm being honest. We respected the U.S. military, who wouldn't, but deep down many of us thought they rely on technology and numbers, we rely on skill and discipline. In our environment, our way is better. We didn't talk about the limitations, not out loud anyway. Our plans were meticulous, but they were rigid. Once the operation started, there wasn't much room for deviation. If the surf was higher than expected, if the current shifted, if the enemy patrol pattern changed, we adapted, sure, but within narrow parameters. Abort and try again later was often the safest call. We weren't trained to improvise major changes mid-insertion. We also didn't place as much emphasis on large-scale, multi-unit coordination at the small team level. Our focus was the team itself, not how it fit into a bigger combined arms picture in real time. Joint fires, air support on call, rapid reinforcement, those were things the conventional Navy and Marines worried about. We operated in the shadows. Looking back, I can see it now. We were exceptional at one very specific style of infiltration, but we had blind spots. We mistook mastery of a narrow doctrine for complete readiness. We thought we were as good as it gets. Then the joint exercise invitation came, and we were about to find out how wrong that quiet confidence really was. The first time we linked up with the U.S. teams, I wasn't sure what to expect. We flew in, met them at the staging area, and right away the atmosphere felt different. Where our briefings were formal, everyone standing at attention, senior officers speaking, juniors listening, the Americans were already sitting in a loose circle on ammo crates, maps spread out on the ground, coffee cups in hand. No rigid hierarchy in the discussion. A young Marine lieutenant was arguing a point with a SEAL chief, and nobody batted an eye. They weren't loud or undisciplined. There was just this quiet intensity, like everyone was expected to contribute, rank be damned. We exchanged greetings, handshakes, the usual pleasantries. They asked about our training pipeline. We asked about theirs. Polite, professional. But I could feel the cultural gap widening the moment planning started. Our side presented our standard infiltration package, detailed timelines, primary and alternate routes, exact rally points, noise and light discipline protocols, everything rehearsed, everything scripted. We were proud of how tight it was. The Americans listened, nodded, asked a few clarifying questions, and then one of their planners, a SEAL lieutenant commander with sun-bleached hair and a calm voice, leaned forward and said, "Cool. Now let's talk about what happens when all of that goes to shit." I remember freezing for a split second, not because the language offended me, we all curse, but because the question itself felt almost disrespectful to the plan. In our world, you built the perfect plan so that nothing went to shit. You trained until failure wasn't an option. But they kept going. What if the surf's 2 feet higher than forecast? What if the tide turns 30 minutes early? What if the enemy shifts a listening post 50 meters left? Every question poked at the assumptions we'd built our entire approach around. They didn't dismiss our plan. They just treated it as a starting point, not scripture. To them, the plan was a framework, something to deviate from the moment reality diverged, which it always does. They spent almost as much time gaming out branches and contingencies as they did on the primary course of action. I felt that first twinge of discomfort, professional pride kicking in. Who are these guys to question our methods? We've operated in these waters our whole careers. They come here once every couple years for an exercise. But underneath the irritation, something else stirred. curiosity. Because the way they argued, openly, without ego, always circling back to what's best for the mission, wasn't something I'd seen much of in our own planning sessions. We valued consensus and discipline. They seemed to value friction, as long as it produced a better outcome. That night, lying in my rack, I replayed the discussions in my head. I told myself we were still the stealth experts. They just had a different style because they could afford to. More assets, more backup. But a small voice whispered, what if their style works better precisely because they don't assume the sea will cooperate? I pushed it down. We hadn't even hit the water yet. Plenty of time to prove our way was still the right way. Or so I thought. The real work started when we hit the water. The exercise scenario was straightforward on paper. Multiple small teams infiltrate a contested shoreline at night, establish beachheads for follow-on forces, conduct reconnaissance, and mark landing zones. Classic amphibious assault support. But the planners threw in every variable they could simulate. Poor visibility, shifting winds, higher than forecast surf, simulated enemy patrols with unpredictable patterns and tight timelines. We launched from submarines and small boats miles offshore, just like always. Our team stuck to doctrine, rebreathers for the underwater approach, precise navigation by compass and depth gauge, timed surf observation from the troughs, then a silent exit on the exact window we'd calculated back in planning. Everything went textbook for the first few hundred meters. We surfaced in the breakers, low-crawled up the sand, buried our swim gear, and moved inland without a sound. I remember thinking, see, this is why our way works, clean, invisible. Then reality hit. A simulated enemy patrol, played by opposing force Marines, appeared 30 minutes earlier than intel suggested, walking right along our planned exfil route inland. Our primary rally point was compromised. Under our old rules, we'd have two choices: abort the mission and extract quietly, or hold position and wait hours for the patrol to clear. Both options meant failure against the clock. I radioed the situation back. We waited for guidance. Across the beach, I could hear, faintly through the surf, the American teams already adapting. One U.S. element had hit heavier surf than expected. Instead of forcing the original landing point, they shifted 200 meters down the beach in real time. No hesitation, no request for approval. They accepted the risk of a slightly exposed approach because it kept momentum. Another team encountered a sandbar that wasn't on the charts. They didn't abort, they used it, turned it into temporary cover, reoriented, and pushed forward. I watched through night vision as one of their teams got detected early, simulated laser kill. Any one of us would have called that a blown insertion. Mission over, reset tomorrow. They didn't stop. The team leader made an immediate call: break into two pairs, have one pair draw the OPFR attention while the other flanked and continued the recon objective. Risky, loud even, but 20 minutes later, they had eyes on the target and were calling in accurate grid coordinates for notional fire support. We, meanwhile, were still pinned, waiting for the patrol to pass. That night, we failed the iteration, not because we were sloppy or indisciplined, far from it. We executed perfectly according to a plan that the ocean and the enemy didn't agree with. During the hot wash the next morning, one of the U.S. instructors didn't gloat. He just asked quietly, what would have happened if you'd shifted one click south when the patrol showed up early? I didn't have a good answer. Later iterations got worse for us. At first, they kept changing conditions. Fog thicker than expected, currents pushing us off course, enemy sensors that forced us to surface farther out. Each time, our rigid adherence to the original plan cost us time, momentum, or the objective entirely. The Americans weren't flawless either. They took risks that sometimes backfired. One team pushed too aggressively and got wiped in a simulated ambush. But even their failures produced results. They learned faster, adjusted faster, and by the third night, their insertions were succeeding under conditions that would have shut us down completely. I started noticing how they read the beach differently. It wasn't just terrain and tides. They watched the rhythm of the waves like it was a living thing. How long between sets, where the backwash was strongest, how moonlight hit the wet sand and created glare. They treated time as a resource, not just we have to be in by 0200, but we have a 15-minute window where the patrol is blind, use it or lose it. It wasn't individual skill that made the difference. We were every bit their equal in endurance, navigation, and stealth. It was systems thinking, flexibility baked into every level, contingency built into mindset, not just as an alternate route on a map. One moment sticks with me more than any other. Our team finally tried improvising, shifted landing sites mid-approach after spotting an unexpected obstacle. It felt reckless. My heart was pounding the whole time, but we made it inland faster than any previous run. When we linked up with the Americans afterward, one of their team leaders just grinned and said, "Welcome to the chaos." That's when it hit me. Technique alone wasn't enough anymore. Perfect execution of a flawed assumption is still failure. Our beliefs weren't just being tested, they were cracking.
I kept waiting for the moments when the Americans would pull rank, when one of their senior chiefs or officers would finally say, "Look, this is how it's done. Your way is too rigid, do it like us." It never came. Instead, what broke me wasn't criticism, it was vulnerability. One evening after a particularly brutal iteration where both our teams and theirs had taken heavy simulated losses, the debrief didn't happen in a sterile briefing tent. It happened around a small fire pit on the beach long after the sun had dropped. Gear was strewn everywhere, guys in sweat-soaked camis passing around instant coffee and MRE snacks. No ranks on sleeves in that light, just tired operators trying to figure out what went wrong. A U.S. SEAL Master Chief, a guy with more deployments than I had years in service, started talking, not to lecture, but to tell a story. He described a real-world insertion gone sideways years earlier, bad intel on surf conditions, a team pinned in the breakers for hours, hypothermia setting in, mission clock ticking. They'd stuck to the plan too long because aborting felt like failure. By the time they adapted, it was almost too late. "We lost good men that night," he said quietly, not in combat, but to the ocean's indifference. Not because we weren't tough enough, because we weren't flexible enough. Then he looked straight at us, at me, and said, "Your plan today? It was beautiful. Textbook. I wish we'd had that kind of discipline on that op. But the beach doesn't grade on style points. It just kills you if you don't listen to what it's telling you in the moment. No superiority, no our way is better, just a shared scar." Another Marine officer chimed in with his own failure, an amphibious raid where over-reliance on perfect stealth left his platoon exposed when the enemy shifted unexpectedly. "We thought silence was strength," he said. "Turns out, sometimes controlled chaos keeps you alive longer." I sat there, staring into the fire, feeling something shift inside me. They weren't teaching from a pedestal. They were inviting us into a conversation they'd already been having for years, with themselves, with their losses, with the ocean. One phrase from that night still echoes in my head, spoken by a quiet SEAL lieutenant who couldn't have been older than 30. "The beach never repeats itself twice. Same sand, same water, same moon, but never the same fight. The ones who survive aren't the strongest or the quietest. They're the ones who change faster than the conditions." I didn't sleep much after that. For years, my identity as a ROK SEAL had been built on being unbreakable in a very specific way, silent, disciplined, enduring. Now I was confronting the truth that endurance isn't just holding your breath longer or crawling quieter. Sometimes endurance is letting go of what you thought made you strong. My mindset started fracturing, not in anger, but in reluctant awe. I stopped defending the old way in my own head. Instead, I started asking the questions they asked. What if this goes wrong? How do we turn failure into forward movement? How do we make the team smarter than any single plan? It wasn't that our discipline was wrong. It was that it had become armor too thick to bend when the world demanded flexibility. That fire pit talk wasn't a lecture. It was a mirror. And for the first time, I didn't like everything I saw in it, but I couldn't look away. The biggest change wasn't in our gear, our swim techniques, or even our physical training. It was in our heads. By the end of the exercise, I no longer saw infiltration as a single perfect path to the beach. It wasn't about finding the one flawless route, executing it with iron discipline, and disappearing. It became something fluid, a continuous process of reading, deciding, and adjusting from the moment we left the submarine or boat until we were miles inland.
The Americans drilled into us, without ever saying it outright, that uncertainty isn't the enemy. Rigidity is. We started embracing controlled risk. Where we once would have aborted an insertion because the surf was a foot higher than planned, we now asked, can we use the bigger waves for cover? Does the noise of the breakers mask our movement better? Is the trade-off worth the momentum? Roles inside the team became more flexible. The point man might still lead the navigation, but if conditions changed, the radio man or the breacher could take over decision-making on the fly. No one waited for the team leader to dictate every shift. Authority moved to whoever had the best vantage point or the clearest read on the situation. That was terrifying at first. It felt like chaos, but it worked. We learned to treat the beach as a living system, not a static map. Tides, wind, enemy patterns, even the way sand shifted underfoot, all of it was information to exploit in real time. Every step had mental branches. If this happens, we do that. If that fails, here's the next move. We stopped seeing contingency plans as backups for failure. They became the plan. I began carrying that mindset into every evolution. During one of the final nights, our team hit a current that pushed us 300 meters off course, way outside our planned window. Old me would have fought the water, burned energy trying to correct back to the exact point. New me signaled the shift. We rode the current, landed in a secondary zone we'd only loosely discussed, and still beat the clock to the objective. When we exfiltrated that night, I felt something I hadn't in years. Not just relief at success, but excitement. The ocean hadn't cooperated, and we'd won anyway. Back home, replaying it all in my mind, I looked hard at who I'd been before the exercise. I'd worn my discipline like a badge. Silence, endurance, precision, those were my identity. And they're still essential, but I now saw how that same discipline had quietly become a cage. I'd confused sticking to the plan with professionalism. I'd mistaken discomfort with new ideas for loyalty to our way. Pride in our heritage is good. Blindness to its limits is dangerous. The Americans didn't make us abandon our strengths. They showed us how to layer adaptability on top of them. Stealth is still our edge, but now it's stealth with options, discipline with judgment, endurance with intelligence. Infiltration stopped being a destination the moment your fins hit sand. It became a mindset you carry the entire mission. And for the first time, I felt like we weren't just surviving the sea anymore. We were starting to think one step ahead of it.
The exercise ended with handshakes, unit patches swapped, and the usual group photos in front of helicopters and landing craft. Everyone smiled. Everyone said the right things about strengthened alliance and shared lessons. Then we flew home. That's when the real struggle began. On the flight back, I sat by the window staring at the dark ocean below. My body was exhausted, but my mind wouldn't shut off. Every evolution replayed in slow motion, the moments we hesitated, the times we clung to the plan, the instances where a small shift could have changed everything. I kept hearing that Master Chief's voice. The beach doesn't grade on style points. Back at base, life snapped back to routine. Morning PT, range time, dive quals, briefings. But everything felt slightly off. I'd catch myself during a planning session wanting to ask, what if the current shifts? Or what if the patrol pattern changes? Questions that would have been brushed aside before as unnecessary complications. The hardest part was the late-night talks with my teammates who'd been on the exercise. We'd gather informally after lights out, whispering in the barracks or grabbing coffee in the team room. No officers, no ranks, just operators trying to process what we'd seen. We admitted things we'd never said out loud before. I felt like a robot out there sometimes. Perfect execution, zero results. I was scared to deviate. What if I made the call and it went wrong? Who takes the blame? We're proud of our way, but is pride keeping us from getting better? Those conversations weren't about abandoning our identity. They were about evolution.
about how to bring this new mindset home without fracturing the unit or disrespecting the instructors and traditions that had made us who we were. I lay awake many nights wondering, how do you change a culture built on iron discipline without breaking it? How do you convince senior operators, guys with decades of experience, that flexibility isn't weakness? How do you integrate adaptability without losing the stealth and endurance that make us unique? And the heaviest question of all, if we don't change, if we go back to pretending the old way is enough, what price will we pay when it really matters? I thought about the North Korean coast, the real beaches we might one day have to cross, the lives that would depend on us making the right call when the plan falls apart. The responsibility felt crushing. I wasn't angry at our old doctrine. It had kept us alive. It had worked. But I now knew it wasn't complete, and knowing that, carrying that knowledge back into a unit that wasn't ready to hear it yet, was isolating. For weeks, I felt caught between two worlds, the operator I'd been and the one I was becoming. The sleepless nights weren't just from replaying failures. They were from realizing that real growth starts the moment the exercise ends, when you have to fight for change inside your own house.
Years later, when I look back at that joint training, the thing I'm most grateful for isn't any new piece of gear, insertion technique, or even a specific tactic we borrowed. It's the mindset. The greatest gift the Americans gave us wasn't their way of doing things. It was permission, quiet, unspoken permission to question ourselves without losing who we are. We didn't come home and throw out our doctrine. We didn't start planning like U.S. teams with endless branches and open arguments in every brief. That wouldn't have fit us. Our unit, our culture, our threats, they're different. We kept our core strengths, the unmatched stealth, the iron discipline in the water, the ability to operate for days with almost nothing. Those things are still what make ROK SEALs unique, but we layered something new on top. We started building flexibility into the foundation, not just as an afterthought. Contingency planning became deeper, more creative. We began training for adaptation the way we used to train only for perfect execution, throwing curveballs into evolutions, forcing teams to shift landing sites mid-swim, to reorganize under pressure, to turn problems into advantages. Younger operators now grow up hearing stories, not just of legendary silent insertions, but of real-world missions, shared in vague terms, of course, where changing the plan fast saved lives. Self-doubt at the right moment became a virtue, not a flaw. Asking, what if we're wrong in the planning room, stopped being seen as weakness. The unit matured, not by becoming more American, by becoming more complete. We still take immense pride in our heritage, the freezing waters of the Yellow Sea, the brutal selection process, the legacy of operators who've stared down real threats for decades. That's all still there. But now there's an added depth, openness to evolution, a willingness to look outward and ask, what can we learn, without feeling it diminishes us? That's the true legacy of those exercises. Firepower comes and goes, technology advances, platforms change, but a unit that can balance unshakable discipline with disciplined adaptability, that's a force that stays lethal for generations. We didn't gain new weapons from that training. We gained a sharper mind. And in our line of work, that's the weapon that matters most.
I've thought a lot about how to end this story. No dramatic reveal, no classified details, no chest thumping about who's better. Just the truth, as plainly as I can say it. We didn't come home from those exercises as American operators wearing ROK patches. We didn't abandon our identity, our language in the water, our quiet pride in doing things with minimal trace. That's still in our blood. The freezing dives, the nights spent motionless in the surf zone, the ability to disappear, that hasn't gone anywhere. But we did come home different. We became a better version of ourselves, a version that kept the old strengths and added something vital, the humility to question, the courage to adapt, the wisdom to know that survival isn't awarded to the most disciplined plan, It's awarded to the team that can change faster than the threat. The real power of a military force doesn't lie in clinging to a doctrine that once worked perfectly. It lies in the willingness to evolve when the world demands it, in the quiet moments of self-doubt that keep you sharp, in the openness to learn from an ally, not because they're superior, but because they've walked a slightly different stretch of the same dark path. That's what those U.S. amphibious exercises gave us. Not superiority, growth. So here's my final confession, the one I've carried since that last night on the beach. The shoreline hasn't changed. The currents are still brutal. The sand still shifts underfoot. The enemy across the water is still watching. But we have changed, and that makes all the difference.